I thought I knew everything about him, until the night we were supposed to say, I do. Part 1. The perfect day, the hidden past. The morning of our wedding felt surreal, like a dream I didn't want to wake from. Sunlight spilled softly through the windows, casting a golden glow over the bridal suite. My dress hung in perfect folds, and the scent of fresh flowers mingled with the hum of excited voices. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, but as the hours slipped by, I couldn't shake an unsettling feeling simmering beneath the surface, like a shadow lurking just beyond the light. I met Jason 3 years ago. He was charming, funny, and seemed to carry with him a quiet confidence that drew me in instantly. He was open about his past, or so I thought. We shared late-night talks about our childhoods, our dreams, and the scars we carried. When he told me about his previous relationships, he did so with a kind of melancholy honesty I'd never encountered before. I believed him. I trusted him. We built a life together. A small apartment filled with laughter, weekend trips to the countryside, and lazy Sunday mornings. Jason proposed under a sky streaked with stars, and I said yes without hesitation. We planned every detail of the wedding together, dreaming of a future filled with love and trust. But that morning, as I sat in the makeup chair, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number, short and cryptic. "He's not who you think he is. Check the email I sent." My heart stopped. I didn't know whether to panic or ignore it. Curiosity won. I opened my email and found a folder full of documents, photos, and messages. They painted a picture of a past Jason had never mentioned, a hidden life filled with secrets, lies, and a woman who claimed to be his wife. My hands shook as I scrolled through the evidence. Photos of him with another woman, wedding invitations from years ago, legal documents hinting at a complicated divorce, things he never told me. Everything I thought I knew was unraveling. I tried calling him, but he didn't pick up. Panic clawed at my chest. Was this some cruel joke? Was he hiding a double life? The hours before the ceremony blurred into a fog of confusion and heartbreak. I couldn't look at him the same way, couldn't pretend that the man I loved was the same man standing before me in a crisp suit, smiling nervously as if nothing was wrong. I was trapped between the dream I wanted and the nightmare unfolding in real time. When the first guests arrived, I felt like I was walking a tightrope over an abyss. Everyone was smiling, congratulating us, sharing in our joy, but I carried a secret so heavy it threatened to crush me. I had to decide. Do I expose the truth now and risk destroying everything? Or do I bury it, pretend it doesn't exist, and walk down the aisle with a man who might be living a lie? I looked at Jason, at his hopeful eyes, and felt the weight of betrayal settling over me like a storm cloud. The wedding was supposed to be our beginning, but for me, it was the start of a journey into a past I never knew existed, and a future I wasn't sure I wanted. Part 2. Secrets unraveled in the silence. The wedding hall was a swirl of color and light, the scent of roses mingling with soft music and whispered congratulations. Outside, the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows that felt heavier than usual. Inside me, a storm raged, a battle between disbelief, anger, and a desperate hope that it was all a mistake. I tried to keep my composure as the ceremony began, but every smile Jason gave me felt like a mask hiding something darker. My fingers tightened around the bouquet. The petals felt like shards against my palm. The email haunted me, its contents looping endlessly in my mind. Each photo of Jason with another woman, the dates on documents showing a legal separation from a marriage he never mentioned. It was as if I had been living a lie, wrapped in his carefully crafted stories. I remembered the conversations, the quiet nights when he'd talk about his past mistakes but never give details. How could I have missed the signs? How could I have been so blind? As the officiant began speaking, I tried to focus on his words, on the promises we were supposed to make. But my mind drifted back to the documents, to the woman who called herself his wife. What did that mean? Was she still in his life? Was this a scam, a manipulation, or something worse? I caught Jason's eye. His gaze was steady, almost pleading. Was he expecting me to trust him, to forgive? I wanted to believe him. I wanted to hold on to the man I loved, the man who'd told me he was ready to start a new life together. But the weight of doubt pressed down harder than ever. During the recessional, I slipped away quietly, away from the crowd and the laughter. I needed to breathe, to think. My phone buzzed again, a message from the same unknown number. "Meet me, now, I have more." I hesitated for a heartbeat, then replied, "Where?" Minutes later, I found myself sitting across from a woman in a small cafe, her eyes tired but resolute. She introduced herself as Sarah. Sarah told me a story that shattered the fragile illusion I'd been clinging to. She had been married to Jason for 5 years. They had fought, loved, and broken apart, but the divorce had never been finalized. He had hidden her existence, started a new life with me without ending the last. Her voice trembled as she showed me messages where Jason promised to start fresh, but never intended to fully let go. She warned me that this wasn't just deception, it was a pattern of lies, carefully hidden. I sat there numb. The betrayal wasn't just from Jason, it was from the life I thought I had built. The wedding day, meant to be a joyful celebration, had become a crossroads. I realized that I had a choice, to walk away and protect myself, or to try and salvage whatever was left of the truth between us. I thought about the years of trust I had given him, the plans we made, the dreams we shared. Could any of that survive this? Or was it all just a beautiful lie? My phone buzzed again, Jason calling. I let it ring. For the first time in a long while, I felt something close to clarity. This wasn't just his secret, it was mine now too, and how I chose to face it would define the rest of my life. Part 3. The confrontation I feared. The hours after that cafe meeting felt like a blur, a haze of conflicting emotions crashing inside me. I kept replaying Sarah's words, her exhausted face, the proof she showed me. The evidence was irrefutable, yet I struggled to accept the reality of it. Jason had lived a double life, weaving me into a story that wasn't true. And worse, he had done it while I believed every word. I sat alone in my room that evening, the wedding dress folded on the chair, the soft light from the lamp casting long shadows. I wasn't sure if I should laugh or cry. The man I had planned to marry was a stranger hiding behind a mask of lies. My phone kept buzzing with messages from friends and family, unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface of our wedding day. How could I let them see me like this? Broken, betrayed, lost? But I knew I had to face Jason. I had to demand answers. I called him. He picked up immediately, his voice warm, calm, too calm, almost rehearsed. "Hey," he said, "are you okay?" "Jason," I said, my voice trembling, "we need to talk, now." There was a pause on the other end, and I could hear the subtle shift, the crack in his carefully maintained facade. "Okay," he said quietly. "I'm coming over." When he arrived, the room was thick with tension. His eyes darted nervously, avoiding mine as if he were searching for an escape route. But I was done running from the truth. "Why?" I blurted out, my hands shaking with the weight of my emotions. "Why didn't you tell me? Why lie about Sarah, about your past?" He swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. "I was scared," he admitted. "Scared you wouldn't love me if you knew everything." I laughed bitterly. "Love? Is that what you call this? Secrets and lies?" Jason looked down, ashamed. "I know I messed up. I never wanted to hurt you. I thought I could fix things, but I was wrong." The confession felt like a dagger twisting in my chest. "How long?" I demanded. "How long were you living this lie?" "Since before I met you," he said quietly. "I ended things with Sarah. At least I thought I did, but the divorce never went through. I was stuck between two lives and I didn't know how to fix it." My mind raced. The legal papers, the photos, the messages, all proof that this wasn't just a mistake. It was deception. "I trusted you," I whispered. "I gave you everything, and you shattered it all." He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Don't touch me," I said firmly. "You need to be honest with yourself before you can ever be honest with me." We sat in silence, the weight of his confession hanging between us like a storm ready to break. "I'm sorry," he said again. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know the truth." The truth wasn't enough. It never would be. As he left that night, the door closing softly behind him, I knew that this chapter was over. But my story, my real story, was just beginning. Part 4. Picking up the pieces. When trust shatters. The morning after Jason left, I woke up to a quiet apartment that suddenly felt too big, too empty. The sunlight streamed through the windows, but instead of warmth, it brought a sharp reminder of what had been broken overnight. Not just a relationship, but the life I thought I knew. My wedding dress hung silently on the chair, a ghost of dreams that now seemed like lies. I couldn't sleep anymore. Every time my eyes closed, the images haunted me. Jason smiling beside me in happier times, the look of guilt etched on his face when he confessed, Sarah's texts burning a hole in my phone. It felt like my whole world was a house of cards, ready to collapse with the slightest breath. I decided I needed answers, not just from Jason, but from myself. How had I missed all the signs? How could I have trusted someone so deeply, only to be betrayed like this? The questions spiraled endlessly, drowning me in confusion and anger. I started by going through everything he'd left behind. Messages, emails, the few personal things he hadn't taken with him. It was like piecing together a puzzle, but each piece added more pain. The messages between Jason and Sarah were not just casual or innocent. They were filled with plans, secret meetings, and whispered promises. It was a world I'd been blind to, a world where I wasn't even close to the center. Then came the calls from friends, some sympathetic, others awkward. People who had suspected something, who had seen Jason act differently, but never told me. I felt isolated, abandoned by the people I thought cared. But amid the heartbreak, a small voice inside me whispered that I couldn't let this define me, that I was more than the mistakes of someone else. So, I reached out to my own support system, my sister, my parents, and a counselor. For the first time in weeks, I spoke out loud about the betrayal, the anger, and the crushing sadness. And slowly, the weight on my chest began to lift. Counseling wasn't magic, it was hard work. I had to face my own insecurities and fears. Why had I stayed so blind? Was I naive, desperate? And most importantly, what did I want next? Jason was still in my life, at least legally. The separation papers were complicated because of his unresolved divorce with Sarah. Each phone call with lawyers reminded me of the tangled mess I'd been pulled into. But despite everything, I started to find pieces of myself again. The parts that weren't broken by his lies, but strengthened by survival. One day, as I sat in the park with my journal, I realized something crucial. This was my story now, not his, not theirs. I was no longer a victim, but a survivor. I could choose how this story ended. The process of reclaiming my life wasn't instant, and it wasn't easy. Some days were filled with hope, others with tears, but every step forward was a step toward freedom. And in that moment, I decided to stop looking back. This was my time to rebuild, rediscover, and redefine who I was without Jason's shadow. Part 5. Rebuilding. Finding strength in the ruins. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest I had ever endured, but also the most revealing. I spent countless hours reflecting, crying, and sometimes screaming into my pillow, trying to expel the storm raging inside me. It was a battle between despair and determination, grief and hope, and every day felt like walking a tightrope. Jason was out of my life physically, but his shadow loomed over every corner. The apartment where we shared laughter and whispered dreams now echoed with silence, each room a monument to a past I was struggling to let go of. I packed away reminders bit by bit, each item stirring a painful memory, yet paradoxically, also marking my slow reclaiming of space for me. I threw myself into my work, not out of passion, but necessity. The deadlines, meetings, and distractions gave my mind something to latch onto, a temporary relief from the relentless replay of betrayals and broken promises. Friends invited me out, trying to pull me back into the world I'd abandoned, and slowly, I started to say yes. One evening, as I walked home from a gathering, the cold air hit my face, sharpening my thoughts. I realized how much I had shut myself away, hiding behind a mask of composure. But true healing would require me to be vulnerable, not just to others, but to myself. I began journaling again, writing down the tangled mess of emotions that filled me. The anger at Jason and Emily, the crushing sadness, the fleeting moments of relief, and most importantly, the spark of hope. Putting pen to paper helped me see the story unfolding from a new angle. My story, not theirs. I also started going to therapy regularly. The sessions were grueling, peeling back layers of pain and denial, confronting fears I hadn't fully acknowledged. But with each session, I found clarity about what I wanted, about who I was without them. The therapist helped me understand that healing was not linear. Some days I'd feel strong and in control, others overwhelmed and lost. Both were okay. In the process, I rediscovered old passions I had shelved: painting, writing, and even running. I signed up for an art class and found solace in colors and shapes that allowed me to express what words couldn't. The physical exertion of running helped clear my mind and burn away some of the anguish. Slowly, I began setting boundaries. I stopped answering Jason's calls unless necessary. I deleted Emily from social media. It hurt, but I knew I needed distance to heal. I also reconnected with people I'd neglected: my sister, cousins, colleagues, building a support network that reminded me I wasn't alone. Their encouragement and presence were lifelines in the darkest moments. One unexpected moment of growth came when I bumped into Sarah at a coffee shop. Her eyes held a complicated mix of guilt and sadness. We didn't exchange words, but in that silent encounter, I realized holding on to anger wasn't going to give me peace. Forgiveness was something I might one day choose, but only on my terms. The hardest part was forgiving myself. I blamed myself for trusting Jason, for not seeing the signs, for loving blindly. But therapy taught me to replace guilt with self-compassion. I was human, and humans err, but I also had the power to learn and grow. As weeks turned into months, the wounds began to scar. The pain didn't vanish. It became a part of me, a reminder of what I survived. And through that pain, I found strength, resilience, and a renewed sense of self. I was no longer the broken woman who walked into that betrayal. I was someone who had faced the darkest parts of life and chosen to rise. This was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one I would write on my own terms with courage and hope. Part 6. New Horizons. Learning to Trust Again. The world felt different now. The heavy fog of betrayal had lifted just enough for me to see the horizon, a distant line where possibility and hope mingled. But learning to trust again, especially after everything I'd been through, was like trying to build a fragile house on shaky ground. For a long time I was afraid that if I opened my heart again it would be trampled, afraid that every smile hiding a secret, every touch concealing a lie. Trust felt like a dangerous gamble I wasn't sure I wanted to take, but deep inside, beneath the layers of hurt and doubt, there was a small, stubborn flame, one that refused to be extinguished by pain. It whispered that love was still worth fighting for, even if it meant risking heartbreak. I started by opening up to myself first, learning to trust my own instincts and feelings again, no longer brushing aside my doubts or silencing my needs. I began to recognize when something felt right or wrong, when my boundaries were being crossed, and I stood firm. It was a slow, uneven process, but every time I honored my feelings, my confidence grew. Then, cautiously, I began to engage with the world in a new way. I reconnected with old friends, met new people, and even dipped my toes into the dating pool. It was awkward at first, uncertain conversations, tentative smiles, and that nagging fear in the back of my mind. One evening, I met Lucas. He was different from anyone I'd known, patient, kind, and genuine. We talked for hours over coffee, sharing stories, dreams, and fears. For the first time in a long time, I felt safe. Not because he promised me forever, but because he showed me respect and honesty in every word. Lucas didn't rush me. He understood my scars, and rather than trying to fix me, he simply walked beside me as I healed. With him, trust was not demanded or assumed, it was earned little by little. But old wounds don't disappear overnight. Sometimes a careless word or an unexpected silence would send me spiraling back into doubt. I found myself questioning my worth, replaying memories of Jason and Emily, wondering if I was just destined to be betrayed. Those moments were terrifying. They reminded me how fragile trust could be, how deeply betrayal had scarred me. Yet, with Lucas's steady presence and my growing self-awareness, I learned to face those fears head-on. I talked about my past, shared my anxieties, and allowed vulnerability without shame. The process was messy, imperfect, but real. I realized trust wasn't about never being hurt again. It was about choosing to believe in connection despite the risks. Alongside rebuilding trust in others, I also deepened my relationship with myself. I embraced my flaws and celebrated my strengths. I stopped apologizing for my feelings and began advocating for my happiness. It was a slow journey, filled with setbacks and triumphs, but each step forward was a victory. One day, standing at the edge of a quiet lake, watching the sun dip below the trees, I felt a profound sense of peace. The past still lingered, but it no longer defined me. I was no longer a victim of betrayal. I was a survivor, a woman reclaiming her life and heart. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to write, and for the first time in a long time, I was ready to believe in love again. Part 7. Facing the Shadows. When the past refuses to let go. Just as I began to breathe easier and open myself to the possibility of happiness again, the past came crashing back into my life like an unwelcome storm. I thought I had buried the pain, locked away the memories of Jason and Emily in a distant shadowed room. But sometimes, shadows have a way of creeping back in, reminding you that healing isn't a straight line. It's a winding path with unexpected twists. It started with a message, a single notification on my phone, an anonymous number, no name attached. I hesitated before opening it, heart pounding with a mix of dread and curiosity. The text was simple, cold. "You don't deserve him. He's a liar. She's a thief." At first, I didn't know what to make of it. Was it a cruel prank, or some desperate attempt to stir up old wounds? Then, over the following days, more messages arrived. Photos, snippets of conversations, fragments of the life I thought I had left behind. It was like being dragged back into a nightmare I'd worked so hard to escape. The messages made me question everything again. My strength, my decisions, the fragile peace I'd started to build. I felt exposed, vulnerable, as if my entire world was unraveling all over again. But this time, I refused to be a victim. I reached out to Lucas, sharing the messages and my fears. His calm support was a lifeline, not dismissive, but steady and reassuring. Together, we reported the harassment and took steps to protect my privacy. Facing these shadows forced me to confront the fact that healing wasn't about forgetting or erasing the past. It was about learning to live with it, to carry the scars without letting them define me. I also realized that part of moving forward meant forgiving myself for the times I felt weak or broken. Forgiving myself for loving someone who betrayed me, for trusting when I shouldn't have, for the mistakes I made along the way. Therapy sessions grew more intense as I worked through this new wave of trauma. I dug deeper into the roots of my pain, uncovering fears I hadn't fully faced. The fear of abandonment, the fear of not being enough. But with every session I found more strength, more understanding, more compassion for myself. I learned to set firmer boundaries, not just with others, but with my own mind. When dark thoughts threatened to consume me, I practiced grounding techniques, meditation, and positive affirmations. Slowly, the harassment messages stopped, the storm passed, and in the quiet aftermath, I discovered something unexpected. Resilience, a fierce, unbreakable spirit that refused to be crushed. That spirit carried me forward, reminding me that while the past might always be a part of my story, it would never have the final word. I was learning to own my narrative, to rewrite it with courage and hope. Because this was not just a story of betrayal or heartbreak, it was a story of survival, growth, and the unwavering power of the human heart. Part 8. Rebirth. Finding strength and love after the storm. The days following the storm of past shadows were quieter, but inside me, a fierce transformation was unfolding. The battle scars left by betrayal and pain were still there, but they no longer weighed me down like anchors dragging me into despair. Instead, they had become marks of survival, proof that I had endured, that I had refused to break. Lucas stood by me through every step, never rushing, never demanding. His presence was a balm to my weary soul. With him, I found a new definition of love, one built on trust, respect, and the freedom to be my true self without fear. But the most important relationship I rebuilt was the one with myself. I learned to celebrate the woman I was becoming, stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. I stopped measuring my worth through the lens of others' betrayals and instead embraced my own value and dignity. Reclaiming my life was not a sudden revelation but a daily choice. Each morning I made a conscious decision to rise above the pain, to nurture my dreams, and to open my heart a little more. There were still moments of doubt and loneliness, shadows of old fears that crept in when I least expected them. But now, I met those moments with kindness, gentle reminders that healing is a journey, not a destination. I returned to passions I had shelved away, writing, painting, and exploring the world beyond my comfort zone. Each new experience was a step toward rediscovering joy and purpose. And as I walked this path, I realized something profound. Love isn't about perfection or never being hurt. It's about vulnerability, forgiveness, and the courage to keep trying. The pain of betrayal had tried to silence my heart, but it had only made me louder, stronger in my voice, clearer in my values, and fiercer in my determination to live fully. One evening, as Lucas and I sat watching the sunset, I felt a deep gratitude. Not just for the new love growing between us, but for the painful lessons that had shaped me. I was no longer defined by the lies or the heartbreak. I was defined by my resilience, my capacity to forgive, and my willingness to love again. This was my rebirth, a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the endless possibilities that await when we refuse to give up on ourselves. The future was still uncertain, but it was bright with hope, and for the first time in a long time, I was ready to embrace it with an open heart.